Alright, so we've got two more examples. I quit recording too early. I forgot to flip the page. Alright, so last two, find all zeros of the function. And so if f of x is 6x cubed minus 4x squared plus 3x minus 2, we have a four-term polynomial. And even though it's a cubic function, we know we should at least have 3 zeros. So highest degree highest degree tells you how many zeros you should end up with. So we should get 3. All right, so I've got a four-term polynomial, so let me rewrite that, which means that I do want to attempt to factor it by grouping. So 6x cubed minus 4x squared, if I take out a 2x and 3x minus 2, and 3x minus 2, I take out a 1, 3x minus 2, oh, I messed up here, I take out a squared, sorry. Alright, so my stuff in parentheses repeats, so I know that this function factors to 2x squared plus 1 and 3x minus 2. Since I'm finding all the zeros, I want to set both of those equal to 0. And find, I've got 2x squared equals a negative 1, divide both sides by 2. And when I take the square root of a negative, what happens? I essentially get a negative 1 times the square root of a positive 1/2, and by definition, I is a square root of negative 1. So my zeros are plus or minus I square root of 1/2. And you don't have to rationalize that or anything, you can just leave it like that. And then over here, I've got 3x equals 2, x equals 2/3. So my zeros, I end up with 3 of them. 1 is real, 2 of them are not. And then I square root of 1/2 and a positive 2/3. Sometimes when you have a four-term polynomial, this is the last example, I promise, you are unable to factor it. So 10x cubed minus 15x squared minus 16x plus 12. If you try to factor by grouping, what happens is that your stuff in parentheses doesn't repeat. So we can't actually factor by grouping. So we've got to figure out another way using algebra that we can solve this equation. So on your homework, even though you're going to be tempted to plug it into the calculator and find your zeros that way, I need to see the work algebraically. So the only thing you're allowed to use your calculator for, or Desmos, is to find 1 zero. And using what you know about multiplicities, you can then use that for division. So if you plug in 10x cubed minus 15x squared minus 16x plus 12 into your calculator, you should find that there is a 0 at 2, which means we can divide this function by an x minus 2. So remember, it's opposite because it's a factor, and so if you set x minus 2 equal to 0, you find that x is positive 2. So we'll go ahead and divide. So we've got x times what gives me 10x cubed, and we've got a 10x squared. Draw your line and subtract. First term cancels out. Combining like terms, negative 15x squared plus 20x squared gives you a 5x squared. Bring your next term down. So what multiplies by x to give me 5x squared? Well, that would be a 5x. 5x times x gives me 5x squared. 5x times a negative 2 gives me a negative 10x. Draw my line and subtract. And we find that 5x squared cancels out, and negative 16x plus 10x gives me a negative 6x. Bring down the 12. And then we've got x times what gives me negative 6x, and that's a minus 6. And so once we get there, we see that, hey, everything here is going to cancel out. My remainder is 0. I know that x minus 2 is a factor. Really, we should already know that because we found it on the graph. And then you've got 10x squared plus 5x minus 6. And so you want to see if it factors. We want to see if we can get the rest of the zeros and the rest of the factors. So 10x squared plus 5x minus 6, I need two numbers that multiply to give me negative 60, but add to give me 5. Hopefully you find that that doesn't work, so you have to think of another way to solve that quadratic. And I think the easiest way would be to use quadratic formula. You can complete the square if you want to. So we've got negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 10 times c, all over 2 times a. And so once you solve and simplify that, you'll get your solutions. So let's see if we can solve that all the way, see if we can get it simplified. Hopefully you are able to do that. We've been practicing with quadratic formula. I believe it was a warm-up today on Delta Math. So if you haven't done that, make sure that you get through Delta Math. And then of course we want to simplify it all the way. So you want to figure out the biggest perfect square factor that goes into 265. If there is one. I don't know if there is or not. It looks like there is not. So that's as simplified as it gets. And so all we're going to do is write in factored form. Actually, we'll write our 0 since I just drew the squiggly bracket. So negative 5 plus or minus 265 over 20. And then factored form, we would have x minus 2 times x minus 5 plus square root of 265 over 20. We'd have an x minus 5 minus 265 over 20. So there you go. Technically, 10x squared plus 5x minus 6 could be considered in the factored form, but we want to make sure we've got those zeros in there. All right, so now officially that should be it for your 2.3 lesson. Make sure that you do the 2.3 homework, read 2.4, and there's a couple of problems I want you to do with those, but they're really easy. I didn't want to spend a whole day looking at complex numbers.